Santiago Whitmore didn't believe in accidents. Everything in his life was built on strategy. The towering Whitmore Industries skyscraper piercing Charleston's skyline, the spotless reputation he guarded like a priceless heirloom, even the exact Italian roast brewed in his private office each morning. Control was his oxygen. Yet standing at the foot of the Charleston County Courthouse steps that humid Monday morning, Santiago could feel it slipping, faintly, like the coastal mist rolling off the harbor. He adjusted the cuff of his custom-fitted navy suit, checking the time. Late. The junior firm handling the Whitmore case was already 5 minutes behind. Santiago's jaw tightened. He didn't suffer delays, especially not from amateurs. His legal team had warned him. Small firms came with small standards. He should have listened. He exhaled sharply, lifting his gaze to the historic marble columns above. That's when it happened. A blur of motion, a yelp, and a sharp collision against his chest. Coffee splattered across his crisp shirt like a Rorschach blot, dark and blooming. A slim woman stumbled backward, horror flashing across her face. Her oversized tote bag slipped from her shoulder, papers spilling in a frantic arc around them. Oh no, I am so sorry," she gasped, kneeling to gather the mess. Santiago didn't speak. His hands, slick with lukewarm coffee, remained stiff at his sides. His shirt, tailored in Milan, was ruined. The woman glanced up, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. She froze. He blinked. For a heartbeat, the world around them, the foot traffic, the courthouse bells, even the rustle of palmetto leaves, blurred into silence. The woman wasn't polished, not composed, not even close. Her sandy hair was coming loose from a messy bun, strands catching the humid Charleston air. There was a pen tucked behind her ear, a bright yellow post-it stuck to the outside of her worn leather binder, and scuffed ballet flats on her feet. She looked every bit the opposite of the manicured attorneys Santiago dealt with daily. And yet there was something disarmingly vivid about her. She scrambled upright, shoving papers into her tote, cheeks flaming. "I'm, Caroline Brooks, from Delaney Law. I was sent to meet you." She offered a hand, then immediately dropped it, realizing the coffee still dripped from his shirt cuff. "Right. Maybe not handshakes just now." If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. For the first time in weeks, a corner of Santiago's mouth threatened to twitch. He crushed it. Emotions, humor, irritation, attraction, they complicated things. He brushed a drop of coffee from his cuff, surveying her. "Miss Brooks," he said, voice clipped. "You're late." Her shoulders stiffened. She swallowed visibly. Yes, sir. Totally fair. Traffic was, I left early, but..." Santiago stepped back, the clean, impersonal mask sliding back into place. "Let's go." He turned toward the courthouse doors, not checking to see if she followed. She did, her heels clicking in uneven bursts behind him like a student trailing a headmaster. Inside, the chill of the marble lobby cooled the edge of his irritation. His mind shifted gears. He needed focus now. Caroline Brooks was an inconvenience, nothing more, except he couldn't quite erase the image of her wide, panicked eyes, or the way her voice had cracked slightly, betraying nerves she fought to hide. They reached the courtroom, where the board of legal representatives waited, shuffling case files. Santiago slid into his designated seat with his usual precision. Caroline, flustered, tripped over a chair leg before finding hers. A low, scattered murmur rippled through the room. Santiago's brow creased. Eyes were on them. He leaned sideways, voice pitched low enough that only she would hear. "Confidence, Miss Brooks. Lawyers don't win by apologizing." Her spine straightened immediately. She nodded once, lips pressed into a determined line. Good. The meeting began, tense, sterile, and full of polite hostility. The other firm's lead counsel, a silver-haired shark named Peter Rawlins, opened with a veiled jab at Santiago's outsider representative. Santiago didn't flinch. He watched Caroline carefully from the corner of his eye. Her opening statement was shaky, her hands barely steady on the file folder, but halfway through something shifted. Her voice steadied, her posture sharpened. She tossed back a smart, strategic counterpoint to Rawlins that even Santiago hadn't anticipated. The room quieted. Caroline Brooks, the chaotic girl with coffee-stained nerves, had just landed a clean hit in a room full of polished predators. When the meeting ended, Santiago stood and offered a rare, short nod. She noticed, and he could tell. Her cheeks flushed pink again, but this time she squared her shoulders as she collected her files. As they stepped back into the muggy Charleston afternoon, Caroline fumbled with her binder, the edge of it knocking lightly against his arm. "Sorry again about your shirt," she said, not quite meeting his gaze. "If you send me the dry cleaning bill, I'll—" "That won't be necessary," Santiago said smoothly. He glanced at her, really looked this time. The stubborn resilience underneath the chaos. The sincerity beneath the nerves. Not polished, not predictable, and utterly, dangerously unexpected. He had built a life around avoiding risks like her. And yet, walking down the courthouse steps beside Caroline Brooks, Santiago Whitmore felt something strange claw at the edges of his perfectly controlled world. Something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Curiosity. He didn't know it yet, but the empire he had built so carefully was about to tilt. Not because of a boardroom war, not because of a rival, but because of one unlikely woman he never saw coming. And for the first time in years, Santiago wasn't sure if he wanted to stop it. He glanced sideways at her, a small crease appearing between her brows as she scanned her notes, lips moving silently in concentration. Interesting. Very interesting. Without realizing it, Santiago slowed his pace slightly, matching her hurried steps as they moved into the bright, restless heartbeat of Charleston's legal district. The conference room inside Whitmore Industries was a different world. Sleek glass walls, white marble floors, the distant hum of Charleston's bustling downtown muffled behind heavy windows. Everything about it screamed perfection, precision, control. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought matter to me either way. Caroline Brooks perched at the edge of one of the leather chairs, clutching her binder like a shield. Across the vast table, Santiago Whitmore reviewed a file with surgical focus, not sparing her a glance. The silence between them was thick enough to choke on. Margot's voice replayed in her mind from that morning. "Stay calm, Caroline. Big clients don't need flash. They need strength, quiet strength." Caroline's palms were already sweating. Great start. Santiago closed the folder with a quiet snap, finally lifting his gaze. His face gave away nothing. "Miss Brooks, tell me why I should trust you with Whitmore Industries." The words weren't hostile. They were worse, cool, analytical, weighed for weaknesses. Caroline inhaled slowly, forcing her voice steady. "Because I don't believe in shortcuts. Because I know the ground-level details most lawyers forget to care about. And because when things go wrong, and they will, you'll want someone who doesn't panic." A faint flicker of something, surprise, crossed his expression before disappearing. "Interesting," he said simply, leaning back in his chair. "That's not what I expected." "Expected what?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Santiago studied her, one hand casually tapping the polished table. "Expected you to apologize again, or promise miracles." Caroline set her binder down firmly. "I don't promise miracles, Mr. Whitmore. Only work. For a moment, just a breath, the tension between them shifted. Less opponent. More something else. Santiago looked almost amused. Almost. Good, he said finally. You'll need that attitude. This case isn't straightforward. He pushed a thick packet toward her across the table. As she reached for it, their fingers brushed. A barely there touch, quick but jarring. Caroline's stomach tightened unexpectedly. Santiago cleared his throat lightly, looking away as if it hadn't happened. Professional. Always professional. She flipped open the file, scanning the pages. Dispute over land rights. Environmental compliance questions. A brewing public relations nightmare. It was worse than Margot had hinted. Caroline looked up sharply. You're about to get dragged through the mud. Santiago gave a slow nod. Which is why I need a team that knows how to fight without making noise. Fight without noise. Santiago's specialty, she realized. Control every headline. Shape every narrative. Never let them see you bleed. But Caroline wasn't sure she knew how to operate that way. She believed in transparency, in tackling problems head-on, not wrapping them in velvet gloves. He must have seen the hesitation flicker in her eyes, because his voice softened. Barely. I'm not asking you to lie, Santiago said. I'm asking you to be smarter than the people who will. A long, fraught silence filled the room. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun threw long, golden streaks across the skyline. A reminder that time was moving, even if everything in this room felt frozen. Caroline closed the folder, setting her hand atop it. I'll do my best. But if you're looking for someone who plays dirty, I'm not it. Another beat of silence. Then, to her complete shock, Santiago smiled. A real one. Small, reluctant, but real. I know, he said. That's why Margot sent you. Caroline's throat tightened. She hadn't realized how badly she needed even a scrap of approval until that moment. Santiago rose, smooth and deliberate. Caroline scrambled up after him, grabbing her things. As they moved toward the door, his phone buzzed sharply against the table. Santiago checked the screen, his mouth tightening. Problem? She asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated, then held up the phone so she could glimpse the message. Meeting confirmed with Rocco Turner, tomorrow at noon. Caroline blinked. She knew that name. Everyone in Charleston's business circles knew that name. Rocco Turner, Santiago's former friend turned sharpest rival. Friendly lunch? She joked weakly. Santiago didn't smile. His face hardened into that impenetrable CEO mask. Hardly. Rocco wants a piece of Whitmore Industries. He won't get it. Caroline nodded, but a chill pricked the back of her neck. If Rocco Turner was circling, things were worse than Santiago let on. As they stepped into the hallway, a few passing employees stole glances, not at Santiago, but at her. Caroline's cheeks flushed. She could already hear the whispers forming. Who's the new girl with Whitmore? Is he replacing Madison? Another scandal brewing. Santiago seemed to notice too. He slowed his pace, letting a small gap form between them. Professional distance. She appreciated it, and hated it a little. At the elevators, he turned toward her. For the first time, she caught a glimpse of something raw behind his careful expression, something restless, tired, human. Miss Brooks, he said quietly, this isn't going to be easy. People will talk. About you, about me. I figured that part out already, she said, managing a small, wry smile. If it becomes too much, he broke off, searching her face for something. You have options. Caroline lifted her chin. So do you. For a split second, something flashed in his eyes. Admiration? Challenge? The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Caroline stepped inside, turning to face him. For a heartbeat, Santiago didn't move. Then, with a slight incline of his head, he said, "Good evening, Miss Brooks." "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." The doors closed between them. Caroline leaned back against the cool metal wall, her heart pounding. It was official. She had just stepped into a storm she barely understood. And something told her Santiago Whitmore wasn't the kind of man you could walk away from unscathed, not professionally, and maybe not personally either. As the elevator descended, Caroline pressed her forehead lightly against the steel wall and whispered, half laughing at herself, "What have you gotten yourself into?" Outside, Charleston's nightlights were beginning to flicker on one by one, and somewhere above her, Santiago Whitmore watched the city below, already knowing that his life, his perfectly controlled life, had shifted course. And there was no turning back now. The next morning, Caroline arrived at Whitmore Industries clutching her coffee like a lifeline. Her nerves buzzed, too loud to ignore, and the familiar southern heat pressed in before she'd even crossed the street. She paused for a breath at the revolving glass doors, catching her reflection. Blazer slightly rumpled, hair pinned but fighting for freedom. She smoothed her skirt, inhaled, and pushed through. Inside, the air was cool, the lobby humming with restrained energy. Assistants moved briskly. Executives tapped at phones. The smell of fresh paper and brewed espresso filled the air. No one spared her a glance, which suited Caroline just fine. Until the elevator dinged. Santiago Whitmore stepped out like a storm dressed in a suit. For a moment, the lobby slowed. She could feel it, the subtle shift in posture, the murmured deference, the silent acknowledgement of who he was. Power wasn't just something Santiago had. It was something he wore without trying. And then his eyes locked on hers. It was just a second, a blink, but it sparked something sharp and electric across the distance between them. His expression was unreadable, cool and neutral, but Caroline's stomach twisted anyway. She ducked her head and made a beeline for the second elevator. "Miss Brooks," Santiago's voice cut through the space, even and unhurried. Caroline stopped, the way a bird freezes at the snap of a twig. She turned slowly. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You're early." "Traffic is unpredictable." She tried to keep it light, professional. "I thought it best to avoid surprises." Santiago's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. "Smart move. Follow me." Without waiting, he pivoted and disappeared down a side corridor. Caroline scrambled after him, her heels clacking awkwardly against the marble. They walked briskly, turning into a smaller, more private conference room. It was elegantly understated. Dark wood table, heavy leather chairs, a wide window overlooking the sleepy streets stirring to life. Santiago gestured to the chair across from his. She sat, setting her bag carefully at her feet. He slid a thick document across the table toward her. "This is the initial merger proposal Turner Industries dropped in my lap last night." Caroline's heart skipped. "Turner Industries?" "Rocco Turner." "The same." Santiago's voice carried an edge now, almost imperceptible, but there if you knew how to listen. "Rocco wants a partnership. Publicly, it would look like a merger. Privately, it would be a takeover." Caroline opened the folder, scanning quickly. Her stomach sank. Rocco's lawyers had been thorough. Slick language, buried clauses. It was practically a roadmap to losing everything Whitmore had built. She looked up. "It's a trap." "Exactly." Santiago leaned back, watching her. "I want you to find every loophole, every angle we can use to dismantle this quietly. No public fights, no headlines." Caroline swallowed hard. "That's a lot of responsibility." His eyes didn't waver. "Can you handle it?" There was no mocking in his tone, no condescension, just a simple, heavy question. Caroline lifted her chin. "I can." For the first time that morning, Santiago smiled. Small, private, almost invisible if she hadn't been looking. "Good," he said, "because Turner is hosting a private event tonight, a fundraiser. His way of making it look like our partnership is already inevitable." Caroline's pulse picked up. "And you're attending?" He nodded once. "And you're coming with me?" The words hit her like a splash of cold water. What?" she stammered. Santiago folded his hands neatly on the table. "Your presence will signal two things. One, that Whitmore Industries has strong, fresh legal backing. And two," he paused, eyes glinting, "that I'm not looking for new alliances." Caroline flushed hot and cold at once. She wasn't naive. She understood the politics. But standing beside Santiago Whitmore in public, she might as well staple a target to her back. Still, she forced her voice steady. "You want to use me as a human shield?" His mouth quirked, preferably one with good posture. Despite herself, Caroline huffed a soft laugh. Then she sobered. "There will be rumors," she said quietly. "Whispers. About why I'm really there. I'm aware." His voice gentled barely. "If it becomes too much, say so." Caroline met his gaze, searching for any flicker of hesitation. She found none. For a long moment, the only sounds were the faint murmur of conversation outside the conference room, the muted rhythm of Charleston beginning another humid day. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll go." Santiago stood, smoothing the front of his jacket. "Good. The car will pick you up at 7. She rose too, gathering the merger proposal into her bag. Her fingers brushed the polished surface of the table, grounding herself. At the door, she hesitated. "Santiago," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. He turned, one brow lifting. Caroline swallowed. "Why me? You could bring any high-profile attorney in the city, someone shinier, safer." A long pause. Then Santiago said in a voice low and even, "Because you're not playing a part, Miss Brooks. You're real. And that's more dangerous to Turner than any contract." Before she could respond, he was gone, striding down the corridor, the click of his shoes fading into the hum of Whitmore Industries. Caroline stood there a moment longer, heart rattling against her ribs. Real, dangerous. She didn't know whether to be flattered or terrified. Probably both. As she made her way back to her temporary desk, Caroline pulled out her phone, thumbing a quick text to Margot. "Need emergency wardrobe advice, black tie event, CEO drama, SOS." The reply came almost instantly. "On my way. And Caroline, breathe. You're stronger than you think." Caroline closed her eyes, holding the phone to her chest for a beat. Tonight, she would step into a room filled with sharks, linked arm in arm with the most untouchable man in Charleston. And somehow she had to remember that she was there to fight, not to feel. But standing beside Santiago Whitmore, she already knew, it was never going to be that simple. At exactly 7 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of Caroline's modest apartment building, its polished surface gleaming under Charleston's fading sunlight. From behind her living room curtain, Caroline watched the driver step out and circle to open the rear door. There was no going back now. She gave herself one last once-over in the hallway mirror. The dress Margot had helped her find was simple but elegant, black, fitted through the waist, modest neckline. Classic, unassuming, until you noticed the subtle daring of the back. Low, but tasteful. She had pulled her hair into a loose chignon, a few strands framing her face, softening the nerves that still buzzed under her skin. She grabbed her small clutch and headed out before she could talk herself out of it. The driver smiled and tipped his hat. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes." She returned the smile automatically, her voice steadier than she felt. The interior of the car was cool and silent, except for the faint click of the driver's radio tuned to a soft jazz station. Caroline smoothed her skirt, gripping the clutch tightly as the city blurred past. Every block brought them closer to the historic Charleston Hotel, where Rocco Turner's fundraiser was already underway. Her phone buzzed. A message from Margot. "Remember, confidence is your armor. Walk like you own the ground." She smiled faintly, tucking the phone away. As they pulled up to the grand entrance, Caroline's stomach twisted. Flashbulbs popped outside the hotel, where a small crowd of local media had gathered. The door swung open. Santiago stood there, waiting. She hadn't expected him to meet her himself. Somehow it rattled her more than the cameras. He looked devastating. A dark-tailored suit, tie knotted with careless precision, hair slightly wind-tousled like he had just stepped out of a painting rather than a boardroom. For a beat, neither of them moved. Then Santiago extended his hand. Caroline hesitated only a second before placing her fingers lightly in his. His grip was firm, grounding. "You look—" Santiago's voice trailed off, almost as if he caught himself mid-thought. His eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with something unspoken. "You clean up well, too," Caroline said lightly, trying to break the moment before it swallowed her whole. The corner of his mouth lifted, half a smile, half a dare. Without releasing her hand, Santiago tucked it into the crook of his arm. A signal, a message. They were walking in together. Not business partners, not strangers. An undeniable unit. Caroline's heart hammered against her ribs as they crossed into the hotel, the golden light of crystal chandeliers spilling over polished floors. Murmurs rose around them, sharp, speculative. She caught snippets. "Who's that with Whitmore? Not Madison? New player on the board?" Santiago leaned down, voice pitched just for her. "Smile, Miss Brooks. We're making history." Caroline forced her lips into something that resembled a confident smile. She tilted her chin up, ignoring the prickling gaze of 100 eyes. Inside the ballroom, Rocco Turner held court near the stage, surrounded by sleek men in expensive suits and women in gleaming dresses. His laugh, low, deliberate, cut through the hum of conversation. Caroline didn't need an introduction. She recognized him instantly from the Charleston business journals. Sharply handsome, charismatic in the way dangerous things often were. And when his gaze found Santiago, it sharpened. When it slid over to Caroline, it sharpened even more. "Well, well," Rocco drawled, making his way toward them with deliberate ease. "If it isn't the Whitmore legacy himself, and who's this?" Caroline felt Santiago's grip on her hand tighten fractionally. Subtle, but she caught it. Santiago didn't flinch. "This is Caroline Brooks, my legal counsel." The emphasis on "my" wasn't lost on anyone. Rocco smiled wide, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He extended a hand to Caroline. "A pleasure, Miss Brooks. I hope Santiago's giving you enough to do. Wouldn't want you getting bored." Caroline accepted the handshake, brief, firm. "Trust me, Mr. Turner. Boredom isn't a problem." A few heads nearby turned at her tone, amused. Santiago's lips twitched, approving. Rocco's gaze lingered a second too long, reading her, weighing her. "Sharp tongue. I like that." "She's not here for your entertainment," Santiago said smoothly, his voice still pleasant but edged with steel. Rocco laughed, stepping back as if magnanimous. "Of course not. Tonight's a celebration, after all. Charleston's finest, under one roof." He raised a glass in mock salute. "To alliances and inevitable mergers." His eyes glittered as he said it. Caroline smiled politely, feeling the tension rise like static between the two men. Santiago guided her away before Rocco could say more, steering her toward a quieter corner by the massive windows overlooking the glittering harbor. "That was subtle," she muttered under her breath. Santiago's mouth curved in a way that wasn't quite humor. Rocco Turner has never believed in subtlety. Caroline followed his gaze back to the crowd, where Rocco now laughed too loudly at someone's joke, basking in attention. "He wants to rattle you," she said quietly. Santiago looked down at her, something dark flashing behind his calm exterior. "He won't succeed." Caroline hesitated. "He thinks you're vulnerable." For a moment, Santiago said nothing. Then he spoke, voice low. "Everyone's vulnerable somewhere, Miss Brooks. The trick is not letting them see where." The words hung between them, heavy and raw. Caroline looked up at him, really looked, and for the first time she wondered, where was Santiago Whitmore's weakness hidden? Before she could ask, a photographer appeared, camera poised. Santiago's hand slid naturally to the small of her back, pulling her slightly closer. Instinct, maybe. Or strategy. Caroline barely had time to breathe before the flash captured them, together, poised, unbreakable, at least on the surface. As the camera snapped again, Santiago leaned down, his breath brushing her ear. "Stay close tonight," he murmured. "There are more games being played here than you know." Caroline nodded, pulse thundering. She wasn't naive. She knew the stakes were higher than anyone said out loud. But what she didn't realize, not yet, was that the most dangerous game of all wasn't about land deals or hostile takeovers. It was about the quiet war happening between two people standing too close under a chandelier's golden light. The war between wanting to keep distance and wanting to step closer anyway. The clink of champagne glasses and the low hum of conversation wove a glittering backdrop around them, but Caroline barely noticed. Her senses were attuned to the man standing at her side, how Santiago's hand rested lightly against her lower back, how every glance, every step seemed calculated not just to show unity, but something more complicated, something layered. Caroline tried to focus on the room, on the strategy they had discussed in the car, but it was hard to remember the script when Santiago's voice kept brushing against her ear with quiet directions, making her skin prickle. "Councilman Reeves at 2:00, he murmured, guiding her subtly with a nudge of his hand. "Be polite but non-committal. He's a Turner sympathizer." Caroline nodded, letting Santiago steer the conversation. She smiled when appropriate, deflected when needed. She was an extension of him tonight, a chess piece in a game she was only beginning to understand. As the evening wore on, more power players drifted over. Men and women in sleek suits, armed with easy smiles and hidden agendas. Caroline held her ground, answering questions crisply, never volunteering more than necessary. She caught the glances, the calculations in their eyes, and knew exactly what they were thinking. New face, young, vulnerable. Whitmore's weakness, maybe. They were wrong. Santiago's calm presence beside her was its own kind of shield. Every time a conversation edged too close to dangerous territory, he would step in. Sometimes with a dry remark, sometimes with a glance sharp enough to cut. Still, the tension built. And then, out of the swirling crowd, came Paisley Carter. Caroline recognized her instantly. The woman was impossible to miss. Icy blonde hair swept into a severe chignon, a shimmering silver gown that turned heads as she passed. Every step Paisley took was deliberate, designed to remind the room she was someone important. She approached like a slow-moving storm, a glass of champagne dangling from manicured fingers. "Well," Paisley said, her voice a syrupy drawl, "Santiago Whitmore, and company." Caroline straightened unconsciously, feeling Santiago's body tense beside hers. "Paisley," Santiago said smoothly, "I didn't realize you were in town." Paisley's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I make exceptions for big events. Wouldn't miss Rocco's little soiree for the world." Her gaze slid to Caroline, sharp and assessing. "You're new." Caroline extended a hand, keeping her expression neutral. "Caroline Brooks." Paisley took the hand lightly, then let it drop as if it had burned her. "Charmed, I'm sure." The sarcasm was so thinly veiled it barely qualified as polite. Santiago stepped in before Caroline could respond. "Caroline is representing Whitmore Industries." Paisley's eyebrows arched. "In court or at charity balls?" The implication hung in the air, cold and cutting. Caroline opened her mouth, but Santiago beat her to it. "Both," he said coolly. "She's far more capable than most who show up just for the cameras." Paisley's smile froze, cracks spiderwebbing across the perfect surface. For a moment the mask slipped, and Caroline saw it, the bitterness, the calculation. "Of course," Paisley said, voice honey-sweet again. "It's just unusual, isn't it? Mixing business and pleasure." Caroline felt the words like a slap, even if they were wrapped in velvet. She was about to answer, something sharp, something final, but Santiago's hand tightened gently at her back, a silent command to hold. So Caroline smiled instead, a small, knowing smile. "Only unusual if you don't know what you're doing," she said lightly. Paisley's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Santiago's lips twitched at the corner, approval flickering across his face. Before Paisley could retort, a voice called her name from across the room, saving everyone from a scene. She lingered a beat too long, then finally turned away, her silver gown catching the light like a blade. As she disappeared into the crowd, Caroline let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You handled that well," Santiago said quietly. "I wanted to handle it differently," Caroline admitted, voice low. "I know," he said. His hand brushed her back again, an almost absent gesture, but steadying. "Sometimes the smartest move is restraint." Caroline studied him, wondering if he was talking about more than just tonight. The evening dragged on, but the mood around them had shifted. People noticed. They whispered behind cocktail glasses, watched them from across the room. Caroline felt their scrutiny like weight on her shoulders. Still, Santiago stayed close, never once letting her drift too far. Near midnight, as the crowd thinned, Santiago leaned down again, his voice a low murmur. "Let's get some air." Caroline didn't hesitate. She needed to breathe, to think. They slipped onto a side terrace, the heavy door clicking shut behind them, muting the ballroom's noise. Outside, the city sprawled in warm, humid darkness. Strings of lights twinkled overhead. The scent of salt water and jasmine floated on the air. For a moment, they said nothing. Caroline moved to the railing, resting her palms on the cool metal. Below, the harbor stretched out, black and infinite under the stars. "That was brutal," she said finally, half laughing, half exhaling the tension she hadn't dared show inside. "You held your own," Santiago said. She glanced at him, finding him closer than she expected. "Was that a test?" she asked, tilting her head. A pause, then, "Partly." "And?" she pressed. Santiago's eyes met hers, serious and unguarded in a way that made her chest ache. "And you passed," he said simply. Caroline looked away, feeling suddenly exposed under the soft glow of the terrace lights. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "All the games." "You're better at them than you think," Santiago said. Caroline gave a dry laugh. "I'm not trying to win." Santiago moved closer, his voice dropping. "Sometimes survival is a win." Their eyes locked, the air between them tightened, stretched thin and trembling. Caroline's heart thudded painfully, and for a moment she wondered if he could hear it. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. It would have been so easy then to fall into something reckless, to blur the careful lines drawn between them. But Santiago straightened first, retreating with a breath so quiet she almost missed it. "We should go," he said. Caroline nodded, the moment breaking, fragile as spun glass. As they walked back into the noise and light of the ballroom, she realized something had shifted, not loudly, not publicly, but somewhere deep beneath the surface, and nothing about it could ever be undone. The following Monday, Caroline walked into Whitmore Industries feeling the aftershocks of the weekend lingering under her skin. The fundraiser had left ripples she couldn't quite smooth over. Every glance from passing employees felt heavier, weighed down with new curiosity, new speculation. She kept her head high as she crossed the lobby, heels clicking with a determination she wasn't entirely sure she felt. In the private elevator that led to Santiago's floor, she finally allowed herself to breathe. Briefly. The doors slid open, and there he was. Santiago stood near the window, the city sprawling behind him, a phone pressed to his ear. His brow was furrowed, jaw tight. Whatever conversation he was having, it wasn't going well. "No," he said, voice clipped. "We're not renegotiating. The terms were clear." A pause. His shoulders stiffened. "Tell Rocco if he's serious, he'll meet me himself. No more games." He ended the call sharply, sliding the phone onto his desk with more force than necessary. For a moment, he stayed there, staring out at the glittering cityscape like he could bend it to his will. Caroline hesitated at the threshold, unsure if she should interrupt. His eyes flicked over, catching her. Something in his expression shifted. Some of the hard lines softened, if only slightly. "Come in, Miss Brooks." She stepped inside, the door whispering shut behind her. Santiago crossed the room, retrieving a folder from his desk. "We have a problem." "Rocco?" she guessed. He nodded. "He's pushing back harder than expected, leaking information to the press, undermining our credibility quietly. If he keeps it up, it won't matter how strong our case is. Public perception will do the damage for him." Caroline's stomach sank. She had seen the beginnings of it already. Whispers in the financial blogs, speculative headlines about Whitmore's new direction, some questioning Santiago's leadership decisions. "Do you want me to draft a press statement?" she offered. "No." Santiago's voice was firm. "That's exactly what he wants. If we respond, we legitimize his rumors. We stay silent. We focus on results." Caroline nodded, but her mind was racing. Silence could be powerful, but dangerous too if mishandled. She took the folder Santiago handed her and scanned it quickly. A strategy memo. Ways to tighten their defenses, mitigate exposure. As she flipped to the second page, a knock sounded at the door. Before Santiago could answer, the door opened and Sophie Whitmore swept in, a bright whirlwind in a designer dress and heels. "There you are," Sophie said, flashing a grin at Santiago before turning her gaze to Caroline. "And you must be the famous Caroline Brooks." Caroline blinked. "Famous?" Sophie crossed the room in 3 long strides, offering her hand. "I've heard so much about you." Caroline shook her hand, feeling slightly off balance. "I hope good things." Sophie laughed, a light musical sound. "Oh, mostly." Santiago isn't exactly a chatterbox, but when he mentions someone twice, we pay attention. Caroline shot Santiago a quick glance. He looked vaguely exasperated but said nothing. "What brings you here, Sophie?" Santiago asked, his tone dry. "I'm hosting a small gathering this Friday, at the family estate." Sophie smiled, dazzling and unbothered. "Dad wants to meet Caroline." Caroline's heart stopped. Your father?" she stammered. Santiago pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering something under his breath. Sophie beamed. "Marshall's curious, and maybe a little concerned, but mostly curious." You've become quite the topic around here. Caroline's cheeks heated. I don't want to cause trouble, she said quickly. You're not, Santiago said more sharply than necessary. His gaze locked onto hers, intense. If anyone has a problem, they answer to me. The room fell into a thick, charged silence. Sophie's smile grew sly. She clearly sensed the tension but chose not to comment. Friday, Sophie said breezily. 8 o'clock. Casual, but not too casual. And Caroline, she leaned in conspiratorially, bring that fire you showed at the fundraiser. Dad respects spine more than flattery. With a wink, Sophie was gone, leaving the office crackling in her wake. Caroline clutched the folder tighter, feeling like she'd just been caught in a storm she hadn't even seen coming. I don't have to go, she said quickly, turning to Santiago. If it complicates things, if it's inappropriate, you're coming, Santiago said, cutting her off. Caroline stared at him. His expression was unreadable, his voice low and certain. This isn't just about appearances anymore, he said. You're part of this, Caroline, whether you like it or not. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught somewhere between sense and something dangerously close to hope. Instead, she closed the folder quietly and nodded. Santiago watched her for a long moment, something fierce and unspoken flickering behind his eyes. Then he turned back toward the window, hands sliding into his pockets, shoulders stiff against the weight pressing down from all sides. Caroline left the office in silence, the door clicking shut behind her. In the elevator, she leaned back against the mirrored wall, her reflection staring back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, that Santiago Whitmore was pulling her deeper into his world, or that a part of her didn't want to fight it anymore. Outside, the Charleston sky turned a dusky pink, the city caught somewhere between day and night. And Caroline Brooks found herself caught right there with it, between what was smart, what was safe, and what her heart had already started to betray. By Thursday afternoon, Caroline could feel the eyes on her. It wasn't obvious at first. Just lingering glances as she passed through the hallways, brief pauses in conversations that snapped back into polite laughter when she got too close. She told herself she was imagining it. Paranoia, nerves about the upcoming dinner with Santiago's family. But when she walked into the Whitmore Industries break room and conversation died instantly, Caroline knew. Something was different. A young assistant, Marla, she thought, quickly buried her face in a coffee cup. Another woman near the window glanced away, lips pressed tight in a look Caroline knew all too well, judgment. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. The whispers had started, about her, about Santiago. By the time she made it back to her desk, her phone buzzed. A message from Teresa Martin, her nosy but well-meaning neighbor. Heard a little rumor this morning. You and Mr. Whitmore? Big news, honey. You in the paper yet? Caroline's blood ran cold. With shaking fingers, she opened her browser and typed Santiago's name. The headline hit her like a punch. Whitmore's new flame? Insiders say CEO's mysterious new companion is no longer just professional. Underneath a blurry photo from the fundraiser, Santiago standing too close to her, his hand just touching her back, her smile turned up toward him, soft and unguarded. Taken out of context. It looked like everything the headline promised. Caroline's throat closed up. She clicked through several more articles, each worse than the last. New romance brewing at Charleston's elite level. Whitmore moving on from old alliances? Who is Caroline Brooks, and how did she catch the city's most elusive bachelor? It was everywhere. Her heart hammered against her ribs, panic rising hot and fast. This wasn't just gossip. This could cost her everything. Her credibility. Her career. Her trembling hands reached for the phone. She hesitated. Would calling Santiago make it worse? Would it look like she needed rescuing? Before she could decide, her office line rang sharply, cutting through the rising chaos in her mind. She grabbed it. Caroline Brooks. Get to my office, Santiago's voice said, low and tight. Now. The line went dead. She barely remembered the walk down the hallway. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out the muted chatter of passing employees. When she reached Santiago's door, she knocked once, then pushed inside without waiting. He stood behind his desk, a printed copy of the article crumpled in one hand. His jaw was tight, his eyes like stone. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caroline found her voice, brittle and breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I know, Santiago cut her off. His voice was quieter now, but no less intense. You didn't leak anything. Caroline stared at him. Then how? They're watching. His hands flattened against the desk, knuckles white. They've been watching since the fundraiser. They were waiting for anything they could twist. Caroline's stomach twisted painfully. You're bored. You're investors. They'll handle it, Santiago said. But the way he avoided her gaze told her it wasn't that simple. Caroline crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly cold. What about me? My firm? My reputation? Santiago's eyes finally met hers, and for once all the shields were down. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said quietly. I should have protected you better. The words hit her harder than the articles had. Protected, not managed, not distanced, protected. Caroline swallowed against the lump rising in her throat. What do we do now? She whispered. Santiago exhaled, a sound of frustration and something else, something dangerously close to regret. We move forward, he said. We don't let them win. But it's not just your name on the line anymore, Caroline said, voice shaking despite her best effort. It's mine too. I know. The words were simple, heavy. Caroline wrapped her arms tighter around herself, trying to hold in the storm threatening to break loose. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Instead, she did the hardest thing. She stayed. If this gets worse, she said, forcing her voice steady, I'll step down. From the case, from everything. Santiago's face hardened. He circled the desk, stopping just in front of her. No, he said fiercely. You don't run. You're better than that, stronger than they are. His hand hovered near her arm, not touching but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I won't let you sacrifice yourself because of me, Caroline said, her voice cracking. And I won't let you walk away because you're scared, Santiago said, voice low. Not from this, not from me. The air between them snapped tight, a live wire thrumming with everything they hadn't said. Caroline's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Her body screamed at her to close the distance, to lean into him, to find safety in the one person she shouldn't trust with her heart. But she stayed frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Santiago's expression softened, just barely. Trust me, Caroline, he said. Just this once. It wasn't fair the way he said it. It wasn't fair how badly she wanted to. Slowly she nodded, just once. Santiago's breath left him in a low exhale, like he'd been holding it. He stepped back then, giving her space she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. There's a meeting with the board tomorrow morning, he said, voice all business now. You'll be there, by my side. Caroline's stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin. All right, she said. And when Santiago nodded, something deep inside her, the part that had been screaming with panic minutes ago, quieted. Not gone, not healed, but quieter. As Caroline left his office, she realized something else, something terrifying. This wasn't just about a job anymore. She was in this, really in it, with Santiago Whitmore, and there was no safe way out. The boardroom at Whitmore Industries gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, every polished surface reflecting the tension vibrating through the air. Caroline sat 2 seats to Santiago's right, a legal pad resting on the sleek mahogany table in front of her. She gripped her pen tightly, not writing, not moving, barely breathing. Across from her sat the board members, 12 of them, lined up like silent judges in a trial she hadn't agreed to attend. At the head of the table, Marshall Whitmore, Santiago's father, leaned back in his chair with a calculating calm that somehow felt more dangerous than the whispered side conversations humming through the room. Santiago hadn't spoken yet. He was giving them space, she realized, giving them enough rope to hang themselves. Beside her, Santiago adjusted his cufflinks with slow precision. His face was unreadable, the perfect CEO mask he wore when the stakes were life and death. Marshall finally cleared his throat, the low sound silencing the room. "We called this meeting to address optics." He didn't look at Caroline, but the implication was clear as glass. Santiago leaned back casually. Optics or gossip? A ripple of uncomfortable laughter circled the table. A few board members exchanged glances. Caroline forced herself to sit still, to not react. Marshall's mouth tightened. "This company's stability depends on public confidence. The rumors circulating about your personal associations are making investors nervous." "Personal associations," Santiago repeated, his tone dry as bone. "You mean Miss Brooks?" Caroline's skin prickled. She kept her eyes fixed on the notepad, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Marshall pressed on. "We need to be proactive. Damage control." "And what do you suggest?" Santiago asked, voice deceptively light. "An announcement? A denial?" The older man steepled his fingers. "A separation." The word landed like a hammer. Caroline's breath caught in her throat. "A clear statement that Miss Brooks has no personal involvement with you or the company's strategic direction. Quietly distancing yourself now would minimize long-term fallout." Caroline blinked hard, fighting the burning behind her eyes. They wanted her gone. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was inconvenient. Santiago was silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but loaded, dangerous. Then he stood, slowly. He adjusted the button on his jacket, his movements deliberate, controlled. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and certain, filling the room without needing to rise. "No." The board shifted uneasily. Marshall's eyes narrowed. "Santiago." "No," Santiago repeated, cutting through the room like a blade. "Caroline Brooks is my legal counsel. She's part of this team, and as long as I'm CEO, she stays." He turned, leveling a slow, steady look at every person in the room. "If any of you think otherwise, you're free to bring it to a vote." Silence, heavy and absolute. No one spoke. No one moved. Caroline's hands trembled in her lap. She pressed them into her thighs, grounding herself against the rush of emotion swelling in her chest. Marshall studied his son for a long beat, then leaned back, his expression unreadable. "This meeting is adjourned," he said, voice clipped. Chairs scraped against the floor as board members gathered their papers and filed out, some shooting curious, speculative glances at Caroline. She kept her face blank, her spine straight. Only when the door clicked shut behind the last of them did she exhale, sagging against the chair for a brief, unguarded moment. Santiago watched her, quietly, intently. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice raw with the effort of staying composed. "Yes, I did," he said simply. Caroline stood, clutching her legal pad like a shield. "You put yourself at risk." "I made a choice." Santiago said, moving closer, every step measured. One I'll make again if needed. Her throat closed. This isn't just business anymore, she whispered. No, he said. It's not. The space between them crackled, alive with everything they couldn't afford to say. Caroline turned away, needing distance, needing air. She moved to the window, staring blindly out at the city sprawled beneath them. You're risking too much, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. For me. Behind her, Santiago's voice was a low hum of certainty. Not for you, Caroline. She turned slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. For us. The words hung between them, fragile and terrifying. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Caroline's fingers tightened around the edge of the windowsill. You're making it impossible, she said, her voice breaking. To what? Santiago asked, stepping closer, each word a thread pulling her apart. To walk away. A breath, a heartbeat. Santiago reached out then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. His fingers brushed her cheek, light as a whisper. Caroline closed her eyes, every defense she had crumbling under the tenderness of his touch. When she opened them, Santiago was closer still, his eyes searching hers for permission he didn't dare assume. The door creaked somewhere down the hall. Voices echoed faintly, reminding them where they were, who they were supposed to be. With a soft, shuddering breath, Caroline pulled back. Not rejection, not yet surrender, just not here, not now. Santiago's hand dropped to his side, but his eyes never left hers. Without a word, he nodded once, an unspoken promise. Caroline turned back to the city lights, pressing her palm flat against the cool glass. Outside, Charleston glowed under a twilight sky, serene and unaware of the storm brewing inside two hearts that had collided too fast, too hard, to pretend it hadn't happened. And deep down, Caroline knew. There would be no undoing this. Not now. Not ever. Caroline should have known peace wouldn't last. By Friday morning, a storm was already waiting for her in the form of an urgent email from Margot. Call me. Now no greeting, no pleasantries. Just that. Caroline's stomach twisted as she snatched her phone from her desk. Margot answered on the first ring. Caroline, her voice was tight, strained. We have a problem. What happened? Caroline asked, heart pounding. Margot exhaled. Someone leaked your old client file. For a second, the world around Caroline blurred, the office walls seeming to close in. My old case? She whispered. Yes, the small business zoning case you worked on before Whitmore. Margot's voice softened, but the tension underneath didn't waver. There's an email, one you sent to opposing counsel, offering to amend a minor error in filing without going through formal court procedures. Standard, ethical, but it's been twisted. Caroline gripped the edge of her desk so hard her knuckles whitened. They're painting it like an ethics violation. The words dropped like stones in her stomach. I didn't do anything wrong, Caroline said, her voice hoarse. I know that, Margot said. Anyone with half a brain knows that. But in the court of public opinion? She paused. It looks bad, especially when the media's already sniffing for blood. Caroline shut her eyes, willing herself to stay calm. How bad is it? She asked. Margot hesitated. It's already on 2 business blogs. Local news is picking it up. A sharp knock at her office door made Caroline jump. She dropped the phone onto her desk and turned as Santiago stepped in. One look at his face told her he knew. His jaw was clenched, his expression a controlled fury she hadn't seen before. We're handling it, he said before she could speak. How? Caroline asked, her voice cracking. It's everywhere. Santiago crossed the room in 3 strides, laying a folder on her desk. Inside was a drafted statement, formal, concise. She did nothing unethical, She followed legal standards. This is an intentional misrepresentation. He tapped the folder once, firm. We release this by noon. Caroline looked up at him, her heart breaking a little at the fierce protectiveness burning in his eyes. They're trying to ruin me, she said quietly. They won't succeed, Santiago said, low and certain. But fear still gnawed at her. What if they dig deeper, she asked. What if they find more ways to spin this? Santiago's expression softened just slightly. He reached out, then stopped himself, hand hovering near hers. They can try, he said, but you're not fighting alone anymore. The words wrapped around her, a fragile shield against the panic clawing at her chest. There was a knock again, sharper this time. One of Santiago's assistants poked his head in, face pale. Mr. Whitmore, he said nervously, you should see this. Santiago's eyes narrowed. What now? The assistant hesitated, then handed over a tablet. Caroline leaned closer, reading the headline that flashed across the screen. Insiders confirm, Whitmore's new counsel caused major client scandal 2 years ago. Her breath caught. Below the headline, the article dredged up every mistake, every minor misstep from her early cases, twisted, exaggerated. It wasn't just about the zoning case anymore. It was character assassination. She felt sick. This is Rocco, Santiago said under his breath. Caroline blinked up at him. Rocco? Turner's fingerprints are all over this, Santiago said. His voice was calm, but the rage simmered just below the surface. He couldn't beat me head on, so he's going after the one thing he thinks I won't defend. Her. Caroline's throat tightened. She wanted to be brave. She wanted to stand tall and say none of it mattered. But it did. The looks, the whispers, the cold weight of judgment pressing in from every corner. Santiago moved closer, lowering his voice. You have 2 choices, Caroline. She lifted her eyes to his, hating how they burned. Tell me. You can step back, leave the firm, distance yourself from me in this mess. The board would accept it. The press would move on. Her heart twisted painfully. And the other choice? She whispered. You stay, he said. You fight, beside me. The way he said it, raw, unguarded, cut deeper than anything the headlines could. Caroline's hand trembled slightly where it rested against her desk. If I stay, she began, voice unsteady. If you stay, Santiago said, voice softer now, I'll protect you. Every step of the way. She stared at him, at the man who had built walls so high around himself, and yet was offering her a way inside. It would be easier to walk away, safer, cleaner. But looking into his eyes, she knew she couldn't. Not anymore. Slowly, she closed the folder with the prepared statement and lifted her chin. I'm not going anywhere, she said. For the first time in what felt like hours, Santiago smiled. It wasn't the polished smile he wore for the cameras. It was something smaller, warmer, real, and it was hers. The assistant slipped quietly from the room, leaving them alone. Santiago stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. They're going to come after you harder now, he said. Be ready. Caroline nodded. I am. A beat, a pause heavy with everything they both knew but hadn't said aloud yet. Santiago's hand brushed lightly against hers, not claiming, not demanding, just there, solid, steady. She closed her fingers around his, feeling the truth settle deep in her bones. They were in this together now. Come what may. Outside the office windows, the Charleston skyline gleamed under a cloudless sky. Bright, unyielding, just like them. The weekend crept in like a slow tide, but there was no real break from the storm. By Sunday evening, Caroline found herself standing outside the Whitmore estate, nerves sparking under her skin. The house loomed before her, grand, sprawling, an architectural masterpiece of Charleston's finest tradition. Spanish moss draped lazily from the trees. Lights flickered warmly in the windows, but to Caroline, it felt less like a welcome and more like stepping onto a battlefield. She tightened her grip on her coat and made her way up the stone path. When she reached the heavy oak doors, they opened before she could knock. Sophie Whitmore stood there grinning like she had been waiting all evening. "You made it," Sophie said brightly, pulling Caroline into a hug before she could protest. Caroline laughed weakly. "Barely. You'll be fine," Sophie whispered as she led her inside. "Dad's in a mood, but that's nothing new. Just don't let him rattle you." Easier said than done. The interior of the house was a study in old-world elegance. Dark wood floors, oil paintings in gilded frames, the faint scent of lemon polish and fresh flowers threading the air. From down the hall, Caroline heard voices, low, clipped. One she recognized instantly, Marshall Whitmore. The other, sharp and unmistakable, Paisley Carter. Caroline's stomach twisted. Sophie caught the change in her expression and rolled her eyes. "Yeah, she's here. Invited herself, as usual." Before Caroline could respond, Sophie tugged her down the hall toward the drawing room. Santiago stood near the fireplace, hands tucked casually into his pockets, his expression unreadable. He looked up the moment Caroline entered. His eyes softened, just for a second, just enough for her to catch it. Then his gaze shifted to his father, who sat in a leather armchair like a king on his throne. "Caroline," Marshall said, nodding once. "Welcome." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice was steady, even though her pulse hammered against her ribs. Paisley, perched elegantly on the couch like a gleaming ornament, offered a thin smile. "I must say, it's brave of you to come tonight," Paisley said sweetly, "given the circumstances." Caroline returned the smile with one of her own, polite, sharp. "I believe in facing challenges directly, Ms. Carter." Santiago's mouth twitched like he was fighting a grin. Marshall leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "You understand, Caroline," he said, voice measured, "that my son carries not just a company, but a legacy. Public perception is critical. One wrong move, and everything falls apart," Caroline finished softly. "Yes, I understand." She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. Marshall studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp, unrelenting. "You've made quite a name for yourself recently," he said. "Some might say, too quickly." Caroline's hands curled into fists inside her coat sleeves, hidden from view. "With respect, sir," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I didn't ask for attention. I only asked for the chance to do my job." Paisley's laugh was a delicate, disbelieving sound. "Come now, Caroline, you can't be that naive. Sharing Santiago's spotlight comes with consequences." Santiago's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, but Caroline shook her head slightly. She wanted to do this herself. "I'm aware," Caroline said calmly, "but I'm not here to hide behind Santiago's name. I'm here because I earned my place." Sophie's soft intake of breath was the only sound for a beat. Then Marshall leaned back, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "Well," he said, "at least you have spirit. That's more than I can say for half the board." Santiago let out a breath, tension easing from his shoulders. Paisley's expression soured, but she said nothing more. Sophie clapped her hands once. "Good. Now that we're done grilling Caroline like a Sunday roast, can we please eat?" Laughter broke the heavy air, lightening the atmosphere by a few precious degrees. Dinner passed in a blur. Polite conversation, cautious glances, undercurrents Caroline could feel even if no one spoke them aloud. Afterward, while the others lingered over coffee, Santiago found her on the back terrace, staring out over the sweeping lawn where the trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. "You were impressive," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Caroline smiled, small and tired. "I survived." He glanced at her, something tender in his eyes. "You did more than that." They stood in silence for a long moment, the night wrapped around them like a velvet shroud. "I'm not used to fighting for a place at the table," she said, voice low. "Not like this." Santiago's gaze sharpened. "You shouldn't have to." "But I do," Caroline said. She turned to face him, heart thudding painfully. "And you know it." A beat passed. Then Santiago reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with a touch so gentle it made her ache. "I know," he said. His hand lingered, his thumb tracing a light, slow path along her jaw. Caroline's breath hitched. The world narrowed to this moment, this impossible, beautiful moment, where it would be so easy to forget the risks, the costs, everything. "Santiago," she whispered. He didn't move closer. He didn't press. He just looked at her, raw and open and terrifyingly real. "I'm not asking you to change for me," he said quietly. "I'm just asking you to stay." The vulnerability in his voice shattered the last of her defenses. Caroline lifted her hand, laying it over his, feeling the steady thrum of his pulse under her fingers. "I'm here," she said, and it wasn't just a promise. It was a beginning. Inside, the murmur of conversation continued, oblivious. But out here, under the Charleston stars, something fragile and fierce bloomed between them, a spark too powerful to ignore, and neither of them wanted to fight it anymore. The rain came without warning. Caroline stood at the edge of Battery Park, the wide oaks swaying above her, their heavy branches dripping with water. She pulled her coat tighter around her, watching the gray smear of Charleston's skyline across the harbor. She shouldn't have come here. She knew it even as she stood rooted to the spot, soaked, shivering. But when she saw the headlines that morning, new rumors, new lies, this time whispering about secret engagements and corporate betrayal, she needed air, space. Anything but another sterile boardroom meeting where her life was dissected by men in polished suits. The drizzle turned heavier, but she didn't move. Her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. She ignored it. She couldn't outrun it anymore. The whisper campaigns, the sideways glances, the quiet doubts even inside Whitmore's walls. It was only a matter of time before Santiago's world decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe he would too. The thought cut deeper than she cared to admit. "Caroline." She turned at the sound of his voice, her heart jerking painfully in her chest. Santiago stood a few paces away, rain dripping from his dark hair, his suit jacket already soaked through. His tie was gone, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked nothing like the untouchable CEO Charleston knew. He looked real, worn down, fierce. He didn't come closer right away. He just stood there, breathing hard like he had run from wherever he parked. His eyes locked onto hers with a desperation that shredded every last defense she had tried to rebuild. "You shouldn't be here," Caroline said, her voice barely carrying over the rain. He took a slow step closer. "Neither should you." The words hung between them, heavy with everything left unsaid. "I needed to think," she said. "I needed to breathe without feeling like I'm drowning in everyone else's expectations. You're not alone in this." His voice cracked on the last word, barely noticeable, but enough to make her chest ache. Caroline shook her head, the rain sliding down her face like tears she refused to shed. "This isn't sustainable, Santiago. You and me, it's not just about us anymore. It's about your company, your future." He moved closer, slow and deliberate, closing the final distance between them. "You think I don't know that?" he asked, voice rough. "Every day, every headline, every meeting, I know exactly what's at stake." "Then why—" She broke off, voice catching. "Why are you still fighting for this?" Santiago reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped her cheek, wiping away a trail of rain. "Because somewhere along the way I stopped fighting for the company first," he said. "I started fighting for you." The words shattered her. Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the rain. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his chest, feeling the solid, steady beat of his heart under her palms. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her in, sheltering her from the cold and the storm and the fear. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped in silence and rain and something too big, too fierce to name. When she finally lifted her head, Santiago's eyes were burning into hers. "I'm not asking you to choose between your career and your heart," he said. "I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. All I'm asking—" His voice broke, raw and unpolished. "Is that you trust me enough to stay." Caroline's breath caught. "You still have a choice," he said, voice lower now. "You can walk away. I'll let you. I'll make it easy. I'll pretend none of this ever happened if that's what you need." She shook her head fiercely, rain flying from her hair. "No." Her voice was firm now, steady. "I don't want easy." He exhaled a shaky breath, his forehead dropping against hers. "Good," he whispered, "because I don't either." Caroline slid her arms around his waist, holding him tightly. As if by sheer force she could anchor them both against the world pressing in. For the first time in days the noise faded, the headlines, the whispers, the doubts. None of it mattered here. All that mattered was Santiago Whitmore, standing in the rain, offering her something he had never offered anyone before. Not power, not wealth, not protection, but himself, completely, unconditionally. And for the first time in a long time, Caroline believed she was strong enough to meet him halfway. When they finally pulled apart, Santiago brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering at her temple. "Come home with me," he said softly. "Not because we have to strategize, not because of appearances, just because I don't want to let you out of my sight again." Caroline laughed, a broken, beautiful sound. "I thought you didn't believe in risks," she teased, voice trembling with something dangerously close to joy. "I didn't," he said. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, reverent. "Until you." She stood on her toes, pressing a soft kiss to his mouth, brief, tentative, but full of promise. When she pulled back, Santiago was smiling. A real smile. "Let's go," she whispered. And hand in hand they left Battery Park behind, stepping into the unknown together. No guarantees, no promises of perfection, only the breathtaking, terrifying certainty that whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Caroline sat on the wide leather couch in Santiago's living room, a thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The fire crackled softly in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow across the room. But the heat hadn't quite reached the icy knots twisted up inside her. She watched him move through the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, barefoot on the hardwood floors. There was something strangely intimate about it, seeing Santiago like this, stripped of his armor, of his $1,000 suits and carefully measured words. He poured her a cup of coffee, setting it on the table beside her without speaking. His hand brushed hers when he pulled away, a fleeting touch that still managed to send a jolt through her chest. "Thank you," she said, her voice small in the quiet. Santiago nodded and lowered himself into the armchair across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes never leaving her face. "You've been quiet," he said after a moment. Caroline wrapped the blanket tighter. "I'm trying to figure out what comes next." Santiago leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What do you want to come next?" The question was so gentle, so unlike the sharp-edged world they lived in, that it nearly undid her. "I want this to matter," she whispered. "I don't want to wake up tomorrow and find out it was just something temporary, something convenient because we're both under fire." He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. "This isn't convenient," Santiago said. His voice was rough, stripped bare. "It's the hardest thing I've ever let myself want." Caroline's heart twisted painfully. "I spent years building walls," he said, his gaze locking onto hers, "telling myself it was better to be respected than vulnerable, that feelings, real feelings, were weaknesses I couldn't afford." He paused, swallowing hard. "Then you showed up. With your terrible parking and your coffee spills and your questions, I didn't know how to answer." A shaky laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it. "And suddenly," he continued, his voice breaking a little, "all the things I thought made me strong just felt empty." Caroline blinked back the sting of tears, the weight of his confession settling deep inside her. "I'm not asking you for easy, Caroline," he said. "I'm asking you for real. For hard days and harder nights and 1,000 moments where we'll want to walk away but won't." The fire snapped behind them, filling the space between his words. Caroline set the coffee aside, pushing the blanket off her shoulders. She needed him to see her, all of her. No shields, no walls. "I don't need perfect," she said, voice shaking. "I just need to know I'm not fighting for something alone." "You're not." His response was immediate, fierce. "Not now. Not ever." She crossed the room before she could think too hard about it, sinking onto the floor in front of his chair. She rested her forehead against his knee, the fabric of his jeans rough under her skin. Santiago's hand slid into her hair, holding her there gently, reverently. They stayed like that for a long, breathless moment. No speeches, no strategies. Just the raw, simple truth of them. When Caroline finally lifted her head, Santiago cupped her face between his hands, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone with aching tenderness. "I love you," he said. The words weren't grand. They weren't planned. They were messy, human, cracked wide open, and they were perfect. Tears slid down Caroline's cheeks, but she was smiling too, a smile so wide it hurt. "I love you," she whispered back. Santiago leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. His breath shuddered out, warm against her skin. "I'm yours, Caroline Brooks," he said, so low she almost didn't hear it. "Whatever comes next, I'm yours." The storm outside had long passed, leaving the city slick and shining under the night sky. Inside, by the fire, in the circle of Santiago's arms, Caroline finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not as a whisper behind a scandal, not as a woman clinging to survival, but as the one who had changed everything, and who was brave enough to stay. The following week unfolded in slow, deliberate moves, meetings behind closed doors, strategy sessions that stretched late into the night. Whitmore Industries was in battle mode, and Caroline was no longer a silent observer. She sat beside Santiago in every room that mattered, fielded every passive-aggressive question thrown her way, dissected every rumor with clinical precision. Together they pushed back against the narrative Rocco Turner had tried to spin. But victories came at a price. Monday morning brought the worst blow yet. Caroline sat at her desk, skimming through a stack of legal updates when a new email pinged. Subject line, URGENT Career Opportunity. Curious, she clicked, and felt her heart plummet. It was a formal offer, from Turner Industries, direct from Rocco Turner himself. A high-ranking legal position, more money than she'd ever dared to imagine, full benefits, full autonomy, and one final line at the bottom that made her skin crawl. Consider it. You deserve better than being Whitmore's shadow. Caroline stared at the screen, her pulse roaring in her ears. It was a trap, a test, and a warning. The walls felt like they were closing in, the quiet thrum of office life suddenly suffocating. She printed the email, sliding it into a manila folder without a word, and made her way to Santiago's office. When she entered, he looked up immediately, sensing something was wrong. What happened? Wordlessly, she set the folder down in front of him. Santiago read the email once, then again. His face tightened with every line. When he finished, he set it aside with a precision that spoke louder than any outburst could have. "He thinks he can buy you," Santiago said, voice low. Caroline crossed her arms, hugging herself. "Maybe he thinks I'm tired of fighting." Santiago stood, coming around the desk to face her. His hands itched to reach for her, but he held back, knowing this had to be her decision. "You know why he sent it," he said. She nodded. "He wants to split us, take me off the board, discredit you by discrediting me." A heavy silence stretched between them. "You don't owe me anything," Santiago said quietly. "If you want to walk away from this, from me—" "I don't," Caroline interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. She saw the flicker of relief in his eyes before he masked it. "You have nothing to prove to me," Santiago said, stepping closer now, his voice softening. "Not a damn thing." Caroline looked up at him, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. "This isn't about proving something to you," she said. "This is about proving something to myself." Her hand brushed his, light but sure. "I fought to build something real here," she whispered. "I'm not letting someone like Rocco Turner decide my story." The words lingered, fierce and unshakable. Santiago exhaled, tension bleeding from his shoulders. "I'll stand behind whatever you decide," he said. "But if you choose to stay—" His voice caught slightly, raw with emotion. "I swear I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it." Caroline smiled, a slow, steady thing that felt like armor slipping into place. "I already don't." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sophie's voice floated in from the hallway. "Sorry to crash your moment, but you're going to want to see this." Santiago opened the door. Sophie slid in, holding up her phone like a trophy. Turner's newest PR stunt just dropped. Caroline leaned in to see the screen. A video played, a glossy montage of Rocco Turner shaking hands with officials, donating to charities, smiling for cameras. And then, the real blow. A quick cut to Caroline's name flashed across the screen, tied to the old zoning case scandal, insinuating, without ever saying outright, that she was unstable, unreliable, dangerous for corporate partnerships. Beneath the footage, the slogan, "Turner Industries, trust built on integrity." The room spun slightly. "He's trying to erase you," Sophie said, voice furious. "He's trying to make it like you're a risk, an embarrassment." Caroline straightened slowly, feeling something harden inside her. Number not today. Not ever. "Release the files," she said suddenly, turning to Santiago. He blinked. "What files?" "The ones proving the zoning issue wasn't my fault," Caroline said. Her voice grew stronger with every word. "The internal memos, the time-stamped corrections, all of it." Santiago hesitated. "You'll be going public. There's no taking it back once it's out." "I know," she said, lifting her chin. "And I'm ready." Santiago searched her face for a long moment, then nodded once. "As you wish, Miss Brooks." His smile was small, proud. And this time, when Caroline met his eyes, she knew she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the life she was building. The one that had Santiago Whitmore standing solidly beside her, storm after storm, hand outstretched. And for the first time, the future didn't look terrifying. It looked like hope. The morning the files went public, Charleston felt different. Caroline sat by the window in Santiago's office. The city stretched out before her in muted grays and golds. She tapped her fingers against her coffee cup, heart hammering a steady, relentless beat. Across the room, Santiago stood with his arms folded, watching the newsfeed stream silently across the wall-mounted television. Her documents were there now. Her truth, no longer buried under headlines written by men like Rocco Turner. Official letters, legal memos, time-stamped evidence showing her handling of the zoning case had been not only ethical, but necessary. Proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. The media's tone had already begun to shift. Words like misunderstood and wrongfully criticized replaced the harsher accusations from days before. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. The real test was still ahead. "Phones will start ringing soon," Santiago said quietly, not looking away from the screen. Caroline nodded, gripping her coffee a little tighter. "And they'll expect blood." He turned then, meeting her gaze with something fierce, something steady. "Let them come," he said. "We're ready." Before she could answer, Sophie burst into the room, breathless, her phone clutched in her hand. "You're trending," she said a little too loudly, "and not in a bad way." Caroline blinked. "What?" Sophie shoved her phone toward her. On the screen was a video. Someone had cut together a side-by-side comparison. Carolyn calmly presenting facts at a public meeting years ago, voice measured and strong, juxtaposed with Rocco's recent over-the-top charity photo ops. The caption read, "Charleston's Real Integrity." Caroline stared at it, disbelief prickling over her skin. People were standing up for her, backing her, not because of who Santiago was, because of who she was. Santiago came to stand behind her, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. "They're seeing the truth now," he said, voice low against her ear. For a long, stunned moment, Caroline let herself believe it. That maybe she wasn't just surviving anymore. Maybe she was winning. The door swung open again, this time admitting Margot, her heels clicking sharply on the marble. "You're needed in Conference Room B," Margot said briskly. "Board members, press, investors." She flicked a glance at Santiago. "They want answers." Santiago's jaw flexed. "I'll come with you." Caroline rose, smoothing her skirt with hands that trembled only slightly. "No." She shook her head, steadying herself. "I need to do this alone." Santiago hesitated, something dark and protective flashing through his eyes. But then he nodded once, solemnly. "I'll be right outside," he said. Caroline smiled, small and real. "I know." The walk down the hall felt longer than it should have. Every step echoed back at her, a drumbeat of nerves and hope colliding in her chest. When she entered the conference room, the buzz of conversation dimmed. All eyes turned to her. Board members, a few investors, a couple of local reporters tucked into the back, pens poised like weapons. Marshall Whitmore sat at the head of the table, watching her with an expression carved from stone. Caroline stepped to the front without flinching. She placed her folder on the table, opened it with calm hands, and looked up. "My name is Caroline Brooks," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong through the room. "You've heard a lot about me these past few weeks. Some true, most not." She let the silence stretch, making them lean forward, making them listen. "I made mistakes early in my career," she said. "Small ones. The kind any young lawyer makes while learning to navigate the impossible balance between clients' needs and the law's demands. But I owned them. I corrected them. I never once compromised my ethics." She lifted the printed articles, letting them see the headlines for what they were. Spin, not truth. "And I refuse to be reduced to a footnote in someone else's power play." A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "Good. Let them squirm," Caroline straightened her spine. I came to Whitmore Industries to work, to contribute, to be part of something bigger than myself. Her gaze swept the room, locking onto each person. And I will not apologize for standing beside Santiago Whitmore. I will not apologize for being good at my job. And I will not disappear because it's easier for others to paint me as a problem rather than admit their own fears. The words echoed against the conference walls. The silence that followed was different this time, heavier, respectful. Finally, Marshall leaned back in his chair, studying her. After a long beat, he gave the faintest nod. It wasn't approval, it was acceptance. Caroline gathered her papers, tucked them under her arm, and turned to leave. As she stepped into the hallway, Santiago was waiting. One look at her face, and his mouth curved into something fierce and proud. "How'd it go?" he asked. Caroline let out a shaky laugh. "I think I just declared war," she said. Santiago reached for her hand, linking their fingers together with quiet certainty. "Good," he said, "because we're going to win it." The world outside was still ruthless, still sharp and watching. But Caroline wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't the outsider scrambling to survive. She was the woman who had stood up, told her truth, and refused to back down. And Santiago Whitmore was right there with her, every step of the way. The courtyard behind Whitmore Industries was quiet, tucked away from the buzz of the city. Magnolia trees lined the stone path, their blossoms heavy in the late spring air. Caroline stood there now, her heels pressing lightly into the gravel, her heart thudding a rhythm she couldn't slow down. Across from her, Santiago watched her with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. It had been 2 weeks since the board meeting, 2 weeks since she had stood up for herself, for them, and the world had kept spinning. Turner's attacks had slowed to a trickle. Investors stopped asking uncomfortable questions. Slowly, painfully, the storm had begun to pass. But tonight wasn't about the company. It was about them. Santiago stepped closer, a small velvet box clutched loosely in one hand. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up, the evening light catching the gold at his throat. "You've changed everything," he said, voice low. "You walked into my life like a storm I never saw coming, and for the first time, I'm grateful I wasn't prepared." Caroline tried to smile, but her throat felt too tight. "You made me believe again," Santiago continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just in loyalty, not just in power, but in love. Real, messy, terrifying love." He opened the box with a quiet click. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, was a ring. Simple, stunning. A single diamond flanked by 2 smaller ones, elegant and timeless. "I know we didn't get here the easy way," he said. "I know we'll have battles left to fight." He paused, breathing hard. "But I want every one of them, with you. Only you." Caroline's hand flew to her mouth, her vision blurring. Santiago dropped to one knee, the gravel crunching softly beneath him. "Caroline Brooks." His voice broke. He didn't hide it. "Will you marry me?" The world seemed to still. The night, the soft hum of the city in the distance, even the slow flutter of the magnolia blossoms drifting down around them. Only him. Only her. Only this moment. Caroline sank to her knees too, right there in the dust and petals, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, fierce, unshakable. "Yes." Santiago let out a shuddering breath, pulling her into his arms, burying his face in her hair like he couldn't get close enough. They stayed like that, clinging to each other, the world finally quiet around them. When he pulled back, he slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. It fit perfectly. Caroline laughed through her tears, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You know this doesn't solve everything," she said, voice trembling with joy. There will still be people waiting for us to fall. Santiago brushed his thumb over her cheek, memorizing her. Let them wait, he said. We'll rise anyway. He kissed her then, slow and certain, sealing the promise between them. It wasn't the fairy tale ending most people would expect. It was better, because it was real. It was two stubborn, scarred people choosing each other, choosing to fight, choosing to stay. Later, as they sat together on the cool stone steps, Caroline rested her head against Santiago's shoulder, her fingers twined with his. I used to think love was supposed to be easy, she said softly. He smiled against her hair. I used to think it was a weakness. Caroline tipped her head up to look at him, her heart aching with how much she loved this man who had once been so unreachable. Maybe it's both, she said. Hard and messy and terrifying, but worth everything. Santiago kissed her temple, lingering. With you, he said, it's worth everything and more. The city lights blinked softly in the distance. And under the quiet Charleston stars, Caroline Brooks and Santiago Whitmore began the messy, beautiful life they had fought so hard to claim. Together. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.